Sometimes you just need a game that absolutely nails it. Just a complete, confident, masterful experience from start to finish. And honestly, there are way more of these than people give the industry credit for. Hello and welcome to Ranked Up. And for this list, I want to highlight some of the best games that, in my opinion, are pretty much perfect. They might not all be 10 out of 10 across the board, but they set out to do something specific, and they do it flawlessly. And one of the best game, I think, is A Way Out. You know how co-op games usually feel like somebody made a single-player game and then kind of stapled another player onto it afterward? Yeah, this is not that. A Way Out is built entirely around two people working together from start to finish. You play as a pair of prisoners trying to escape prison and survive everything that comes afterward, but honestly, that's just the setup. The real magic comes from how the game constantly finds new ways to make both players feel involved. One person might be distracting a guard while the other sneaks around. One player is having a conversation while the other is doing something completely different across the room. Sometimes you're both focused on the same objective, and sometimes the game deliberately splits your attention. And somehow it all works. We played through this with a friend here and spent half the time laughing because the game keeps throwing unexpected situations at you. Then it suddenly gets serious, then funny again, then serious again. I'm obviously not going to spoil the ending, absolutely not. If you've somehow avoided spoilers all these years, keep it that way. Trust me on that one. One of the best co-op experiences you can still have today. And another one is The Wolf Among Us. For a game about fairy tale characters, this thing is dark as hell. The setup sounds ridiculous when you explain it out loud. The big bad wolf from classic fairy tales is now a sheriff investigating murders in a hidden community full of magical characters living among normal people. That sounds completely insane, and somehow it becomes one of the coolest detective stories in gaming. Bigby Wolf is just such a fantastic protagonist. Every conversation feels tense because you're constantly deciding whether to be diplomatic, threatening, violent, or somewhere in between. Half the fun is figuring out what kind of Bigby you want to be. The atmosphere does a ridiculous amount of heavy lifting too. The neon-soaked city streets, the soundtrack, the comic book art style, the noir-inspired storytelling. Everything clicks together. You know those games where you finish an episode and immediately start the next one because you physically need answers? That's basically The Wolf Among Us. Even after all these years, I still think it's Telltale's best work. A detective story that's almost impossible to put down. Now, next up, we have Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy. I mean, nobody expected this game to be as good as it turned out. Seriously, remember the situation when it launched? Everybody saw the trailers, everybody saw the Marvel branding, everybody remembered Marvel's Avengers, and a lot of people kind of assumed they already knew how this was going to go. Then the game came out, and suddenly people were like, wait, hold on, this is actually really good. The writing is the big thing here. The Guardians spend basically the entire game arguing, making fun of each other, getting distracted, making terrible decisions, and somehow becoming more lovable because of it. They genuinely feel like a dysfunctional family. And unlike a lot of licensed games, these versions of the characters feel like their own thing. They're not trying to copy the movies scene for scene. There's also a surprising amount of heart underneath all the jokes. A couple of moments hit way harder emotionally than I expected them to. Is the combat perfect? Not really. It gets repetitive occasionally. Do I care? Not even a little. The characters are so enjoyable to spend time with that I was happy to keep going anyway. One of gaming's best surprise success stories. And coming in next, we have Metro Exodus. For a game set after the apocalypse, Metro Exodus has some unbelievably beautiful moments. Most post-apocalyptic games focus on complete misery. Everything is ruined. Everything is hopeless. Everything wants to kill you. Metro definitely has some of that. A lot of that, actually. But Exodus also understands something important. If everything is depressing all the time, eventually you stop caring. So instead, it gives you these quiet moments. You're riding across a frozen landscape at sunrise. You're listening to conversations aboard the train. You're exploring abandoned buildings while the wind howls outside. Then 5 minutes later, some horrifying mutant creature is trying to tear your face off. The balance is fantastic. The survival mechanics add just enough tension without becoming annoying. Resources matter. Ammunition matters. Your equipment matters. Every bullet feels valuable. And the atmosphere is ridiculous. Some games tell you a world is dangerous. Metro Exodus makes you feel it. Every step outside feels like you're taking a risk. A masterclass in immersive world building. So next up, we have Sleeping Dogs. For a game that never got a sequel, Sleeping Dogs has stayed alive in gaming conversations for an amazingly long time, and honestly, I think that's because there's still nothing quite like it. You play as undercover cop Wei Shun inside Hong Kong's criminal underworld, and right away the game separates itself from the endless parade of open-world crime games. Part of that is the setting. Hong Kong feels vibrant, crowded, and distinct. But the real secret weapon is the combat. Instead of relying mostly on guns, Sleeping Dogs lets you solve a lot of problems with your fists, and those fights feel fantastic. Brutal environmental takedowns, satisfying counters, hard-hitting animations, all of it still holds up. There's a little Batman Arkham DNA in there, but it develops its own identity quickly. What surprised me most, though, was how invested I became in the story. The undercover cop angle creates constant tension because Wei is basically living two lives at once, and watching those worlds collide becomes incredibly compelling. It's one of those games that deserved way more attention than it got. A genuine cult classic that earned every bit of its reputation. And coming in next, we have Mafia, Definitive Edition. Sometimes bigger isn't better. That's probably the easiest way to explain why Mafia still works so well. A lot of modern open-world games feel obligated to give you endless activities, giant maps, hundreds of collectibles, and 50 different systems competing for your attention. Mafia doesn't really care about any of that. Instead, it focuses on telling a great crime story. You step into the shoes of Tommy Angelo, a taxi driver who slowly gets pulled into the world of organized crime, and the game commits completely to that premise. The remake does a fantastic job modernizing everything while preserving what made the original memorable in the first place. The city looks incredible. The performances are excellent. The missions have purpose. The pacing stays tight. And maybe that's what makes it feel so refreshing today. Nothing feels bloated. Nothing feels like filler. The game knows exactly what it wants to be and never loses sight of it. That's surprisingly rare. One of the cleanest and most satisfying crime stories gaming has ever produced. Another one we have here is the 2013 Tomb Raider. Before this reboot, Lara Croft was basically gaming royalty already, but also kind of stuck in that older action hero mold where everything felt a bit too polished, a bit too untouchable. Then this version shows up and just throws her into absolute chaos. And I mean chaos. The opening hours alone are basically a disaster simulator. You're stranded, hurt, cold, constantly barely surviving. And the game really commits to showing Lara not as an icon, but as someone who is just trying not to die every 5 minutes. What makes it work is the pacing. It never lets you settle into comfort. One moment you're scrambling through caves, the next you're in a firefight that feels way above your pay grade, then suddenly it's quiet again and you're just breathing. I think what surprised me most is how well the survival tone actually holds up. Even years later, it still feels grounded in a way a lot of modern action games try to fake but don't quite hit. It's not just a reboot, it's a reset button done right. A perfect origin story that still hits hard today. And next on the list, it's Detroit: Become Human. Okay, so this game gets talked about a lot for its branching narrative, but I don't think people always appreciate just how many moving parts are actually happening under the hood here. You're constantly making choices as multiple characters, and the game is tracking all of it. Not just big story beats, but tiny behavioral stuff that comes back later in ways you didn't expect. And yeah, sometimes it goes a little heavy on the dramatic side. It's not exactly subtle about its themes, but honestly, I think that's part of the charm. It's a game that really wants you to think about consequence, identity, control, all that stuff, even if it occasionally leans a bit hard into the messaging. The 3-character structure is what really sells it, though. Connor, Kara, and Marcus all feel like different perspectives on the same collapsing world. And depending on your choices, their stories can go in wildly different directions. I still remember entire playthroughs where things went so off the rails I genuinely wasn't sure if I was doing it right. And that's kind of the point. There's something addictive about seeing how far your decisions can bend the story. One of the most ambitious narrative experiments in modern gaming. Now moving on, we have one of our favourites. It's Uncharted 4, A Thief's End. This game just celebrated its 10-year anniversary in last month, and it still looks and plays better than most AAA games coming out today. Naughty Dog decided to end Nathan Drake's story not with a giant, world-ending explosion, but with a quiet, character-driven meditation on obsession and family. And it works so well. The set pieces are the best in the series. That chase scene in Madagascar is still jaw-dropping, but it's the quieter moments that stick with you. The rope mechanics added a great new layer to the traversal, and the semi-open levels in Scotland and Madagascar let you breathe a bit. It's a bit long, and the combat is still just cover shooting, but Uncharted 4 is the perfect send-off. It proves that blockbuster games can have emotional depth. Play the Legacy of Thieves collection on PS5 or PC for the best experience. If you've never played an Uncharted game, you could start here. But don't play the first 3 first. It makes this one hit so much harder. And finally we have The Last of Us. Not the remake, not the remaster discussion, not the tech side of it. Just the story. Joel and Ellie's journey is still one of the clearest examples of how far writing in games can go when everything lines up properly. The performances, the pacing, the structure, it all feeds into this slow, emotional build that never really lets you go. What makes it work isn't just the big moments, it's the quiet ones in between. The conversations that feel too normal for the world they're in. The little pauses where nothing happens, but everything changes. And then when the game does decide to hit you emotionally or structurally, it doesn't hesitate. It just goes for it. Even now, years later, people are still debating the ending, still talking about what it means, still replaying it just to feel it again. That's not something you get from most games. That's something you get from the ones that actually stick. A defining moment for narrative-driven gaming. Now, I do have a bonus for you. It's The Witcher 3, Wild Hunt. This is the big one. The open-world RPG that ruined other open-world RPGs for a generation. The side quests in The Witcher 3 are better than the main quests in most other games. Every single contract feels unique, with its own mini-story, moral dilemma, and interesting monster lore. The game is massive, easily 100+ hours, but it rarely feels like filler. The 2 expansions, Hearts of Stone and Blood and Wine, are better than the base game, which is insane. Yes, the combat is the weakest part. It's floaty and the hitboxes are weird, but you don't play The Witcher 3 for the combat. You play it for Gwent, the card game, obviously, but also for the world, the characters, and the quest design. 11 years later, they're still adding new content. A new expansion, Songs of the Past, was announced just last month, and it is targeting for a 2027 release. If you've never played it, the PS5 and Xbox Series versions run at 60 FPS and include all the DLC. It is a commitment, but it is 100% worth it. But yeah, that's all we have for today. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, please consider liking and subscribing. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.